The man whose life we're about to explore is nothing short of fascinating. The name is William Herschel, more commonly known as the father of modern astronomy, and more commonly known as the man who, after 12,000 years, discovered another planet, mapped out the whole Milky Way, and along the way discovered infrared radiation. And by the way, those were just his side projects. Herschel was one of the most accomplished composers of his era, earning a fortune that would make him a millionaire by today's standards. Unlike many scientists of his time, Herschel didn't come from a wealthy family. His parents, however, were deeply engaged in discussions about current events, science, and music. His father was an infantry drummer with a passion for crafting musical instruments, who instilled a love of music in all his children, including William. Though music became William's passion, his early life took a bit of a detour into the military. After seeing that being in a war is not all that fun, he decided to travel to London and pursue his love of music. Since Britain was absolutely loaded with money from their colonies, they had lots to invest in open theaters and culture, which was the perfect place for someone like William. He found work as a music copyist and a private tutor, but he would later remark that the work was very boring and exhausting, and it didn't leave him enough time to compose his own pieces. So he worked his way up until he could afford a horse, and he set himself out on a journey to find himself a stable job that will give him enough time for himself. He eventually secured a stable position as a church organist. A few years later, he became one of the best composers in England. He was earning £400 a year, which is like £860,000 today, and enough to rent a three-story house that is now a museum. But when did the father of modern astronomy actually start doing astronomy? Well, William Herschel, despite all his success, was still kind of bored, and he started looking for a new hobby to obsess over. And one field that was particularly interesting and mysterious to him was astronomy. Being ambitious as always, he wanted to discover if binary stars exist, which are basically two stars that form a system held together by their mutual gravitational attraction, something that was not quite understood in the 18th century. But for him to be able to do that, he would basically need to map out the entire night sky, measuring and comparing their coordinates every 6 months, which is an extremely tedious work. He would also need a really good telescope, and the ones available at the time were just not up to standard. So he decided to make his own by starting an apprenticeship as a mirror maker. He set up a production in his house, almost burning it down in the process, and he was basically polishing mirrors all day until his hands fell off. But after a few months, he had himself one of the most advanced telescopes in the world, copies of which he would later sell throughout the whole Europe. During this process of mapping out the entire night sky, on March 13th, 1781, between 10 and 11 o'clock in the evening, while conducting a sky survey, he noticed a strange and particularly bright object in the sky. He initially thought that the celestial body was a comet, but its trajectory was more elliptical, like a planet, which was a huge discovery. Since ancient times, humanity only knew of the 5 planets: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. This new celestial object was the biggest discovery since antiquity, and he will name it Georgium Sidus, after the current English king, George III. The reason he did this was because he wanted to be on the king's good side, and nothing can butter the man up like naming one of the biggest discoveries of the century after him. And he needed to do that because William Herschel's ambitions were only getting bigger, and he needed funding for the next big project, like this 20-foot and later 40-foot telescope, which he later used to map out the whole Milky Way, proving it was a vast collection of stars and not just a random scattering like a nebula. The planet Uranus was actually named by the German astronomer Johann Elert Bode, who proposed the name after the ancient Greek god Uranus, the deity of the sky and the father of Saturn, or Kronos in Greek mythology. Bode suggested the naming to align with the classical naming tradition of associating planets with mythological figures. It shouldn't go without saying that William's sister, Caroline Herschel, was an extraordinary scientist in her own right. Not only did she make significant contributions to astronomy, but she also commanded the respect of the scientific community, a rare achievement for a woman in the 18th century. Caroline assisted William in his observations, meticulously recording and organizing his data. She discovered 8 comets, including the one that still bears her name, and catalogued hundreds of stars and nebulae. Her contributions were so groundbreaking that she became the first woman in history to be paid for her scientific work, earning an annual salary of £50 directly from the king. Together, their work reshaped astronomy, but William's curiosity didn't stop there. While spending his time with telescopes, he noticed that some color filters seemed to transmit more heat than others. This would mean that different colors of light have different temperatures. To investigate, he directed sunlight through a glass prism, splitting it into a spectrum. Using 3 thermometers, he measured the temperature of each color. One thermometer was placed in the spectrum, while the other 2 served as controls outside the light. Herschel observed that the temperatures steadily increased from violet to red, and then, just out of curiosity, Herschel extended his measurements to the region just past the red edge of the spectrum, where no visible light appeared. To his surprise, this invisible region recorded the highest temperatures of all. Herschel had just discovered what he called calorific rays, now known as infrared radiation, a type of light invisible to the human eye but detectable by its heat. His experiment proved for the first time that light exists and operates far beyond the limits of human perception. Today, infrared radiation is a cornerstone of modern science and used in everything from astronomy to thermal imaging. For all his remarkable achievements, William Herschel is rightfully hailed as the father of modern astronomy. He expanded humanity's understanding of the universe further than anyone had ever imagined, forever changing the way we see the stars. Join me next time as we take a look at another brilliant scientist, Gertrude Bell Elion, a woman who laid the foundation for modern pharmacology.